When whispers travel through the marble halls of Buckingham Palace, they are rarely innocent. But one whisper, cruel, calculated, and whispered behind closed doors, would shatter royal bonds forever. This wasn't palace gossip. It was a dagger, and Princess Anne was done staying silent. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began with a quiet moment, a corridor half-lit by late afternoon sun, and Anne, ever the vigilant guardian of royal tradition, overhearing what no one expected. The voices were hushed but not quiet enough. Staff loyal, seasoned, and once trained to speak in silence stood rooted, unsure of how to respond. And then the sentence came, icy, precise. It slithered across the room like venom, Kate's common touch, please. It's as manufactured as her smile. Time froze, faces turned pale, and in the corner, out of view but very much present, stood the one woman who had heard enough. Anne had never been known to flinch, but in that moment, even she felt the walls tremble. The calculated cruelty, the petty jealousy, Anne recognized the rot. It wasn't just an insult to Catherine, it was a direct violation of everything the monarchy had tried to rebuild. The staff, sworn to discretion, shifted uncomfortably, caught in a moment that would soon become a reckoning. Anne's gaze fixed on the aide who had heard it all. No words needed. The betrayal was no longer whispered. It was alive, burning, undeniable. In the days that followed, Anne could not shake the moment. Camilla's words weren't merely unkind, they were strategically laced with contempt. Contempt for Catherine's grace, her rising popularity, her connection with the public, and more disturbingly, contempt for the future of the monarchy itself. The staff, though silent, carried it in their eyes. Camilla had crossed a line, not just of decorum but of decency. Anne wrestled with it internally. For decades she had protected the institution, buried private scandals beneath layers of royal silence. But this time, something felt different. This wasn't just palace politics. It was sabotage masked as superiority. As Anne paced her private quarters, the weight of responsibility pressed hard. She knew the dangers of exposure, the press hysteria it could spark, the fractures it could widen. But deeper still was a loyalty not just to Kate, but to the very soul of the monarchy. If Catherine, the future queen consort, could be so mercilessly diminished behind closed doors, what did that say of the crown's integrity? Anne's decision hardened with each passing hour. There are betrayals one can forgive, but not when they come from within the throne room itself. Camilla had misjudged Anne's silence as complicity, but Anne was never one to speak unless it mattered, and now it mattered more than ever. The moment she overheard was no longer a secret, it was a storm waiting to break, and break it would. The question was how loud and how long before the walls of the palace echoed with consequence. But to understand why Anne risked royal wrath to expose Camilla, we must rewind to a hidden power struggle brewing for years. Behind public smiles, an invisible war has simmered for decades. Two women, both close to the throne, both fiercely loyal to the monarchy, but with drastically different visions of its future. What began in silence now threatens to explode into a royal reckoning. The rivalry between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla did not begin with a single word or one event. It was layered subtle glances, calculated pauses, and the unspoken language of disdain that only royals understand. From the moment Charles remarried, Anne's discomfort was impossible to ignore. She had spent her life safeguarding the crown's dignity, enduring its cold traditions and carrying its weight without complaint. And then came Camilla, charming the press, reshaping her image, and slowly but unmistakably altering the tone of the palace. What Anne saw as legacy, Camilla saw as leverage. Their difference wasn't just in personality, it was in philosophy. Anne believed in preserving the monarchy's silent strength. Camilla, in contrast, believed influence could be bent and rebranded. And in the middle of that growing storm stood Kate. Anne, though stoic, had always harbored a quiet admiration for Catherine. She saw in her the reflection of duty, the grace, the restraint, the refusal to exploit the spotlight. HT for personal gain. To Anne, Kate was not just William's wife, she was the future queen consort the monarchy needed to endure. Camilla, however, saw something else entirely. As Catherine's popularity soared and public sentiment rallied behind her, Camilla's once uncontested influence on Charles began to fade. Whispers crept through the corridors. Staff who once aligned with Camilla began gravitating toward Kate. It was subtle at first, choices in scheduling, silent nods of preference, but Anne noticed every shift. The battle lines were never drawn in ink. They were drawn in moments. A seat taken at a family function, a snub cloaked in etiquette, a decision made behind closed doors. Anne, though outwardly reserved, kept a meticulous eye on how things moved. She sensed how Camilla manipulated Charles in ways even the king himself couldn't detect. Carefully placed words in pillow talk, subtle exclusions from conversations, calculated charm over allies. Camilla's handprints were everywhere. And yet, Anne said nothing. Until now. Anne's concern deepened not from jealousy or resentment, but from a conviction that the monarchy was being steered into dangerous waters. Camilla's reach wasn't just touching titles, it was manipulating perception. And Kate, in all her poise, was being quietly sidelined in a war she didn't even know was being waged. To Anne, that was the ultimate betrayal. One future queen quietly dismantling another, not with force, but with finesse. The staff noticed it. And that made it undeniable. The palace, once unified in unspoken hierarchy, was now split into factions. The weight of tradition clashed with the hunger for reinvention. Anne saw through Camilla's carefully curated persona, sensing the shadow beneath the smile. And though she had endured decades of royal politics, this time felt different. It was personal, it was dangerous, and it was escalating. But it wasn't just tension. It was what Camilla said in private that would finally cross the line. It was said in confidence, a cruel remark, a single sentence meant to belittle but never to be heard outside private walls. But the palace has ears, and one of them belonged to someone who would not stay silent, Princess Anne. The words were uttered in a closed-door meeting, not meant for public consumption but heavy with contempt. Camilla, queen consort, surrounded by her inner circle of senior staff and advisors, let her mask slip. With a tone soaked in superiority, she leaned back and said it plainly, "Kate knows how to play the peasant queen game." It was not a joke. It wasn't light-hearted. It was the distillation of years of jealousy, polished into one sentence that sliced through the air like a sharpened blade. The room fell into an immediate, stunned silence. Every aide froze. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared down at their notes, unsure whether to react, respond, or simply survive the moment. No one dared challenge her, not out loud. But the damage was done. That sentence, those 10 loaded words, spread like slow poison. Whispers among staff turned to cautious questions behind closed doors. Eyes once trained to avoid drama now betrayed quiet alarm. And it didn't take long for the words to find their way to Anne. It came from a trusted aide, someone who had served her loyally for over a decade, someone who looked her in the eye with visible distress, lowering their voice just enough to recount what they had overheard. Anne said nothing for several seconds. She didn't blink, but something inside her shifted. The fury didn't erupt, Anne was too composed for that, but it tightened her jaw, narrowed her focus. Camilla hadn't simply mocked Kate. She had mocked the very values Anne had spent a lifetime upholding: duty, dignity, and quiet strength. To call Kate a peasant queen wasn't just an insult to the woman, it was an insult to the people, the very public that the monarchy relied on for survival. And for Camilla to say it so openly, so carelessly, revealed something far more dangerous. She believed herself above consequence. That was Anne's breaking point. Still, Anne didn't move immediately. She sat with it, let it burn slowly, fueling a deeper resolve. She reflected on Kate's quiet endurance over the years, the relentless media storms, the pressures of motherhood, the expectations of royalty, and how she had never once cracked. And now, in return for her grace, she was being shredded behind her back by the very woman who should have been her ally. Camilla hadn't just crossed a line, she'd obliterated it. Kate, at this stage, had no idea. Oblivious to the betrayal, she continued to carry herself with elegance and grace, unaware that knives were being sharpened just a few corridors away. And perhaps that was what made it worse. The innocence, the trust, the belief that family, no matter how complicated, would at least uphold a certain code of respect. Anne watched her with a growing sense of protection, a simmering determination rising inside her with each passing day. Camilla, meanwhile, carried on as if untouched. Her laughter at royal engagements remained just as loud. Her grip on Charles remained just as tight. And yet, beneath her confidence was a fatal flaw. She believed herself immune to accountability. Anne knew better. The palace had long memories. And sometimes silence wasn't strength. Sometimes silence was complicity. Princess Anne had kept many royal secrets, but this time she was done protecting Camilla. No shouting, no spectacle, just two royal titans in a room, locked in a deadly quiet confrontation, one exposed, the other unflinching. When Anne stepped into Camilla's private salon, she wasn't seeking apology, she was delivering a warning. There was no knock, no need for protocol. Anne entered with the same force she'd used her entire life to cut through royal nonsense. Camilla looked up, surprised but not alarmed. She mistook Anne's silence for civility, unaware that what stood before her was not a sister-in-law but a reckoning. Anne didn't sit. She didn't blink. She only spoke once. Camilla offered her usual smile, forced, thin, and far too late. "I heard what you said, and so did others." The air thickened. Camilla's brows lifted, her eyes narrowing as if to question, to test the waters. But Anne wasn't there to play. Camilla's initial response was predictable, measured denial wrapped in false innocence. She called it a misunderstanding, a twist of context, a private joke gone awry. But Anne didn't flinch. She repeated the words back to her, slowly, surgically, with no room for interpretation. That was when Camilla's tone shifted. The denial hardened into something else, veiled condescension. She hinted at palace politics, hierarchy, seniority. She reminded Anne, subtly but unmistakably, that she was queen now. But Anne was ready. Her voice cut through the room with precision. "You may be queen, but you're not untouchable." And in that moment, Camilla's smirk, so often her shield, wavered. It wasn't just the words that rattled her. It was the quiet certainty behind them. Anne wasn't threatening her reputation. She was challenging her entire foundation. Camilla had built her reign on soft manipulation, subtle influence, and the assumption that no one would dare push back. But Anne wasn't a politician. She was the monarchy's last line of dignity, and Camilla had crossed it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. Camilla realized she had no control in this exchange, and that realization shook her more than any headline ever could. Anne didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every syllable carried the weight of legacy. She reminded Camilla that the palace was not hers to twist, that respect wasn't worn like a crown, it was earned through service, humility, and restraint. And when Camilla tried one last time to reassert her footing, Anne simply turned away. The message had been delivered. The warning had been cast. The silent war, once hidden beneath layers of royal etiquette, was now exposed in full view. As Anne walked away, the walls no longer whispered, they waited. For once, Camilla had no rebuttal, no ally in the room, no exit. Only the echo of Anne's voice and the crushing truth it carried. But Anne's warning was only the beginning. What came next would turn royal eyes toward Camilla with new suspicion. She smiled through pain before, but this was different. When Princess Anne told Kate the truth, it shattered the last illusion of peace, and in the quiet heart of Kensington Palace, a future queen broke down, not for herself but for what her children would inherit. Anne didn't speak lightly. She had waited, considered the consequences, and still, in the end, chose truth. It wasn't scandal that moved her, it was loyalty. Loyalty to a woman who had carried the burdens of royalty with grace, who had endured the icy glances, the comparisons, the unspoken pressure to measure up, all while never letting the cracks show. But now, Anne couldn't let her continue blindly. She had to know. So, in a quiet moment, far from curious eyes, Anne told her. Every word, every insult, every chilling detail of what Camilla had said and how the staff had frozen in fear. For a moment, Kate said nothing. Her face remained still, but her hands trembled. The silence didn't last. Her voice cracked not with weakness, but with the kind of grief that comes from realizing trust had been misplaced. She wasn't angry first. She was heartbroken. after all the years of trying to fit the mold, of being endlessly scrutinized, of walking the razor edge between duty and dignity. This was her reward, a knife in the back from within her own family. Anne watched her closely, seeing the tears rise and fall, not in loud sobs, but in quiet devastation. And when Kate finally looked up, there was no confusion in her eyes, only clarity. Camilla hadn't just attacked her, she had diminished her legacy. Worse, she had insulted the very image Kate had built to protect her children's future. In the hours that followed, Kate drifted through a fog of memory. She remembered the awkward introductions, the forced smiles, the constant effort to be seen as worthy. Flashbacks struck like lightning, press briefings where she stood beside Camilla, family gatherings where small slights were cloaked in formality. And through it all, she remembered her mother-in-law Diana, the one who had walked this path before her, alone, misunderstood, hunted. Kate vowed to walk a different road. But suddenly, the ghosts of the past didn't feel so distant. The patterns had returned. The cruelty had shape-shifted, but it hadn't vanished. Later that evening, Kate told William. She said the words plainly, but her voice betrayed the wound. William didn't shout, he didn't storm out, but the anger in his eyes was volcanic. His fists clenched, his silence was louder than any outrage. He knew what this meant, not just for Kate, but for the institution they were meant to lead. And in that moment, something between them solidified. A quiet vow passed between husband and wife. They would not allow this to touch their children. They would draw the line here. Kate, once again composed, looked at her reflection not with vanity but with resolve. She would not shrink, she would not retreat. She would protect her family not just with smiles and grace, but with strength. The old games of the palace would not define her children's future. Not again, never again. But while Kate reeled in silence, Anne was preparing for something far more public. Camilla never expected them to turn. But when the palace staff, once fiercely loyal, began whispering support for Kate behind closed doors, the Queen Consort realized she'd overplayed her hand. The monarchy was shifting, and it wouldn't be in her favor. The walls of Buckingham Palace may not speak, but those who work within them do. And in the wake of Anne's quiet confrontation and Kate's silent unraveling, a new end of resistance began to form. At first, it was nothing more than subtle shifts, conversations that ended abruptly when Camilla entered a room, eyes that no longer met hers with deference, minor scheduling errors that would have once been unthinkable. But beneath the surface, something far deeper had fractured. For years, Camilla had controlled the narrative with charm and calculated favor. But the comment about Kate had pierced a collective nerve, and the staff, those who witnessed, absorbed and endured the monarchy's true inner workings, were no longer content to remain neutral. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into warnings. Small details were passed to trusted media insiders, not as scandalous revelations but as breadcrumbs. Unnamed sources began hinting at internal divisions. Headlines carefully avoided names but spoke volumes. Tension in the palace, new rift among senior royals. The press, long conditioned to tiptoe around Camilla's influence, began asking quiet questions. And within the palace, a silent loyalty began to solidify, not around power, but around principle. Kate's quiet dignity had earned something Camilla never could, genuine devotion. And Anne, with her commanding presence and unimpeachable integrity, became the quiet voice guiding the shift. In discreet meetings with senior aides, Anne's message was sharp and simple: protect the monarchy, not the ego. She didn't name Camilla. She didn't need to. Her words were a call to conscience, a reminder that the crown's survival depended not on manipulation, but on merit. Her intervention gave permission to those who had long bitten their tongues. One by one, staff began stepping away from Camilla's inner circle. The most trusted voices now aligned themselves with Anne and Kate, and their absence spoke louder than protest. Camilla noticed. Her once effortless control began to feel strained. Briefings felt colder. Her words echoed back with less certainty. And then came the final blow, subtle but devastating. At a royal charity gala, William stood before a crowded room and during his speech delivered a line that hit with surgical precision. Steadfastness is rare in a world so easily shaken. I am endlessly grateful for those who carry the burden of duty without needing to be seen. He didn't look at Anne, but the message was unmistakable. The room shifted. The applause came slowly, then rose. Camilla remained composed, but her fingers curled tightly around her glass. She felt it, the tide turning. Behind palace walls, allegiance had begun to change. Not through rebellion, but through retreat. Camilla wasn't being attacked. She was being abandoned. Her words had cost her something priceless: trust. And in a monarchy where perception is power, trust is everything. With the palace now stirring, Camilla makes a desperate move, one that could either save her reign or destroy it. She didn't rise to queen by playing nice. Camilla strikes back through subtle interviews, off-the-record conversations, and quiet reshuffling within the palace. But her desperation reveals more than strength, it exposes fear. Camilla knew how this worked. When influence slipped, you didn't plead, you recalibrated. With her grasp on the palace slipping and staff drifting toward Anne and Kate, she called in her most trusted advisors and launched a quiet counterattack. Damage control began immediately. The PR team was instructed to reframe the narrative. Stories would emerge subtly, framed as concern but laced with implication. They would not mention names, just whispers of strain, hints of pressure. Anonymous sources painting a picture of a young royal woman, buckling under the weight of expectation. Kate is under immense stress, one source told a friendly outlet. Another headline followed, "Is the future queen struggling in silence?" The campaign was calculated. Camilla knew that public opinion was fluid. That favor could shift with one well-timed quote or a sympathetic photograph. But this time, it wasn't working. The leaks were noticed, and not just by the press. Anne and William saw through it instantly. They'd lived long enough within the machine to know its tricks. And this was classic misdirection. But Camilla had made one critical error. The public knew Kate. They had watched her, scrutinized her, tested her for years. They had seen her stand tall through loss, motherhood, and monarchy. So when the rumors began to swirl, the reaction wasn't doubt, it was defense. The audience didn't question her strength. They questioned the motive. Behind the scenes, William quietly adjusted his schedule. More events with Kate, more appearances with Anne. The message was subtle but clear. Solidarity. Camilla's counterattack hadn't weakened them, it had exposed her. Meanwhile, Anne's presence became sharper, more intentional. She didn't respond to the headlines. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own power, and it rang louder than Camilla's whispers. The tension began seeping into Camilla's own marriage. Charles, who had long leaned on her for counsel and stability, began to feel the pressure of the shift. Questions were raised in private about staff resignations, about press stories with uncanny timing. The trust that had once defined their partnership was now riddled with uncertainty. Camilla could sense it, his hesitations, his guardedness. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure what he'd say if pressed to choose. Public perception, once carefully managed, began tilting. Articles questioning Kate's capability were met with overwhelming public backlash. Comment sections flooded with support. Editorials defending her poise. The quiet campaign had turned on itself. Camilla had underestimated one powerful force: empathy, and in doing so, she had begun to isolate herself not only from the staff and the public, but from within her own family. But the Queen Consort's greatest miscalculation wasn't her media games. It was underestimating Anne's next move. She had been silent for too long. But now, Princess Anne speaks not in tabloids, not through whispers, but before the entire royal court. Her words, sharp as a sword, would forever reshape the inner sanctum of the monarchy. The gathering was meant to be routine, another quiet meeting of senior royals behind closed doors, where calendars were coordinated and public appearances discussed. But from the moment Anne entered the room, the air shifted. There was a stillness to her, a clarity of purpose that made even the most seasoned advisors sit straighter. Charles watched her cautiously. uncertain but alert. Camilla was noticeably absent, an absence that spoke volumes. For years, Anne had been the monarchy's quiet sentinel. She had endured, observed, and protected the institution with unshakable loyalty. But now, she wasn't there to protect, she was there to expose. Anne didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was deliberate, composed, and utterly unyielding. She didn't name names, but no one in the room was left wondering. She spoke of duty, true duty, not the kind that sought power, but the kind that carried weight in silence. She spoke of the younger generation, of Kate, and the quiet resilience she had shown. And then came the line that stopped every breath in the room. Disrespect toward a future queen is not merely a personal insult, it is a crack in the very foundation of this monarchy. The statement landed like a thunderclap. Charles blinked, his expression faltering. For the first time in decades, his sister had broken protocol, not for herself, but for the crown. Anne pressed on. She invoked the legacy of their mother not as sentiment, but as a standard. Honor is not inherited, she said. It's earned. Through sacrifice, through humility, through knowing when to speak, and when silence becomes complicity. The weight of her words settled like stone across the table. There was no outrage, no chaos, just the sound of truths finally spoken aloud. The moment was unforgettable. A royal gathering known for its rehearsed civility transformed into a reckoning. And then something unprecedented happened. Applause. Not theatrical, not forced, just a spontaneous ripple of hands from the royal staff and even some family members. It wasn't just approval, it was release. For years they had tiptoed through hierarchy and politics, but now Anne had broken the silence for them. She had said what so many had thought but never dared to voice. She had pierced the veil of royal immunity and reminded everyone that titles without character meant nothing. Charles remained quiet, caught between the sister he respected and the queen he now depended on. Camilla's absence became more than avoidance, it became confirmation. And though no vote was taken, no formal decision made, everyone in the room understood that a shift had begun. The monarchy had been challenged not by enemies, not by the press, but from within. And it came not through rebellion, but through truth. But the fallout was far from over, because the monarchy now faced a choice that would echo through generations. A crown may be worn, but respect must be won. In the final reckoning, it wasn't just Camilla who faced judgment, it was the monarchy itself. One woman exposed the rot, another bore the scars, and a future queen stood stronger than Eve. The walls of Buckingham Palace had witnessed centuries of scandal, betrayal, and redemption, but nothing could have prepared them for what came next. Behind closed doors, in the privacy of a royal study stripped of press and performance, Charles confronted Camilla not as a husband seeking comfort, but as a king confronting consequence. His words were sharp, tired, and lined with disappointment. "You've turned the palace into a battlefield," he said, "and now we are bleeding from within." It was not rage that marked his tone, but regret. The man who had long defended Camilla now stood disarmed, facing the reality that her ambition had corroded the very unity he swore to protect. Outside those guarded walls, the world was watching, and it was not silent. Public sentiment, once indifferent or cautiously approving of Camilla, had begun to curdle. The tide had turned. Editorials began praising Kate's resilience. Commentators dissected her silence not as weakness, but as grace under fire. Royal observers, previously careful in their commentary, began making pointed references to internal conflict and a generational divide. The whispers had become headlines, and while the palace never confirmed anything directly, Camilla's sudden absence from key events spoke louder than any statement. Her schedule was quietly reduced. Her influence, once unquestioned, was now slowly reeled in. In contrast, the image of strength had shifted. Kate and Anne began appearing together more often, two women, once distant in age and role, now united in resolve. The public saw them not as figures of tradition, but as anchors of integrity. Their bond had become unspoken proof that true power lies not in controlling narratives, but in surviving them. Camilla's silence, once strategic, now felt conspicuous. The queen consort, who had wielded proximity like a weapon, was now isolated by it. The media, emboldened by the shifting atmosphere, began to circle closer to the truth. Reputable outlets hinted at a confrontation, a moment that fractured the inner workings of the royal household. While no one named the insult, the implication was clear: something had been said, something cruel, something that cut too deep. And it had not been forgotten. The narrative had changed. Camilla was no longer the misunderstood survivor, she was the one who crossed a line. And Kate, once merely the poised duchess, had become the silent victor of a war she never started. The legacy of this reckoning was not just personal, it was institutional. The monarchy had been forced to look inwards, and in doing so, it had been reminded of a truth long buried. Beneath protocol and titles, crowns can be inherited, but character cannot. Respect must be earned, and in the end, it wasn't the most powerful voice that triumphed, it was the one that spoke the least, but stood the tallest. And as the palace stands quieter now, echoes of that whispered insult still haunt the marble corridors, proof that even queens are not beyond consequence. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.